So my name's Natalie Hollier. I work here at ThoughtWorks, the venue that's hosting us, and I'm a global lead for product innovation. So we're referring to purpose being having a mission greater than profits, greater than just making money. And traditionally, business kind of fits within the economy, and we hear about the purpose of business in order to make profit. So what we want to do is talk about here a triple bottom line approach to people, planet, and profit, where we're balancing all of these things. Because business exists within society and it exists within the planet, and we need to make sure that we're not externalizing those impacts that we have, that we're actually valuing and measuring those as part of how we run business today. This is becoming, I think, like more and more growing issue. Just to share a few kind of key trends that are happening for the role of business in society and how those expectations are shifting. We obviously hearing things like the latest IPCC report on climate change, saying that we have around 11 years left to really reverse and prevent that trend on some of the catastrophic tipping points. In terms of society, we're seeing like a lot of, from both a consumer perspective as well as an employee perspective, people are interested and passionate about how do we have careers with purpose, how do we buy meaningful products that are actually helping this situation. And so some research by BPMG and GlobeScan showed that actually 40% of the global population falls into this category of aspirationals who care about not just buying a quality product or service that's functional, but also the ethics and sustainability of that. And they see that as an and, not an or. There's another segment around 26%, which are the kind of eco-friendly segment. And so if you combine those two together, around 65% of the population, this is something that people are really passionate about. And we see this particularly within millennials and Gen Zs. And so this is a trend that's only increasing. And on the business front, from the finance world, ESG and sustainability reporting is really starting to become mainstream. A lot of stock indices are requiring companies to report as part of their listing, and we see that in like B corporations is using business as a social force within the world. So this is both an opportunity to really capitalize on these movements at the moment. It's also something that's kind of rapidly becoming table stakes that organizations should think about factoring in and keeping up. A lot of times we hear about, zero waste or net neutral, zero carbon emissions, and this is kind of the equivalent of saying like we want to do zero bad, zero harm. We can actually go much further beyond that into regenerating, restoring the environment, creating positive impact that is beyond just kind of the zero neutral factor. So this is something to keep in mind, that a lot of innovative products and services, if you look at some of the research that's happening, where things are going, is like moving towards this space. So without further ado, I would like to introduce our speakers, Sophie and Sunya. So Sophie's Senior Associate Director at NYU Center for Sustainable Business. She also has experience working at BSR, Business for Social Responsibility. And Sunya Ojure, who's the Director of Sustainability at Salesforce. She's joining us from San Francisco remotely, which was unfortunately created a lot of challenges with the tech setup. So sorry about that, folks. But very excited to hear from them both this evening to share about materiality matrix and how to use this as a tool, kind of both within a new company strategy, but also as a thinking tool around when you're building products and services. What are some of the environmental and social and business ethics issues to be aware of that we incorporate into our products and into our teams?
Good evening, everyone. Thanks so much. Natalie was actually a student at Stern right when our center started, so it's great to be here hosted by a Stern graduate. So I work at the NYU Stern Center for Sustainable Business. We're an academic center within the business school. We are 3 years old as of January of this year, and we really work to integrate sustainability throughout the business school. So helping to educate the next generation of business leaders to learn how to manage in a resource-constrained world. As Natalie already did a really great job in setting the stage, I always think it's helpful because the word sustainability means a lot of different things. Sometimes people, when I say the field I work in, they ask, isn't that just about kind of keeping a company around into the, future, or is it about being profitable? And my answer is always sort of, yes, it is all of those things. We talk about sustainability as a lens that you can bring to decision making. So regardless of the industry you're in, regardless of your position, regardless of your day job, we really feel that sustainability is about bringing that mindset, asking the right questions, and it doesn't just have to be relegated to a team whose exclusive job is to really focus on that. So I think that's just a really helpful kind of point that I'd like to make, is that even if you don't work in sustainability, you can still be a change agent within your organizations. So again, just to set the kind of context that we're talking about, it's really about assessing any new product design or innovation or business decision, really looking at where society, the economic value, and the environment intersect. You're never going to have a perfect solution, but it's trying to do your best to ensure that you're really weighing all of those needs. So just a really quick scan through kind of some of the really large-scale challenges that our society is facing right now. I'm not going to go in depth on all of them. I think you're probably all familiar. But we're currently consuming and growing at a pace that is not sustainable. It's also sort of challenged and hampered by growing population growth as well, right? More people on the planet need to consume more as well. We also have shifts in the global middle class, so as people have more spending power and buying power, again, helping to drive that sort of upward trend in needing more food, needing more resources, needing more. Of course, and then this is sort of always the challenge, of course, more people coming out and sort of moving up into the middle class is obviously viewed as a positive trend, right? But it's all about how do we kind of encourage that economic growth and development while keeping the planetary boundaries in balance as well. Growing economic inequality as well, causing civil and society, sort of challenges. And then lastly, more sort of, I think, a trend, but an opportunity, particularly around the technology sector. I would say sort of the growth and accessibility of so many technology tools is really, I think, a benefit for encouraging more positive sustainability action, but it also, from the business side, can be viewed as sort of a risk or threat as well. As you have increasing radical transparency, everyone can take a video from their phone, they can send a tweet. Really what you've seen is that companies increasingly are exposed all across their global supply chains. You can have a worker in a factory take a video of something and immediately broadcast that out. So it's not to say that sort of transparency is a negative, but that from the company perspective, this is the sort of environment and the new reality. If you remember the sort of United Airlines really sort of the sort of debacle that cost them about $1 billion in market share value. So you can really see the reputational risk that companies face as well. So again, a quick summary. There are lots of societal issues out there, but business is at risk from climate change, from lack of potential water and drought, from economic and social inequity, the radical transparency trend that I mentioned, and changing expectations as well. Companies have to operate and manage a lot of different stakeholders as well. So, again, it's a little hard to see or recognize, but I think this just sort of sums up kind of what you might say the kind of hot mess situation that we're currently living in, and that both sort of representing the different risks that businesses have, but also the opportunity. So some of you may be familiar with the Sustainable Development Goals. In essence, it's sort of a more positive way of framing what the challenges we currently face are. The Sustainable Development Goals are the update to the Millennium Development Goals. And unlike the Millennium Development Goals, business was at the table in creating these, and businesses are really bought into these. Studies show that there's something like $1 trillion of economic value, $12 trillion of economic value to be created by businesses attacking these societal challenges. That's through innovations, through their own supply chain practices, through launching new products and services, etc. So there's a lot of business value at stake here. So with all of these challenges and opportunities, how can businesses prioritize and figure out which ones make the most sense for them to work on? So typically what you see is sort of an evolution in how companies think about sustainability. From one really focused more on risk and compliance to one where you're really embedding purpose and value core to business strategy. So risk and compliance, probably fairly straightforward. It's, ensuring that sort of the manufacturing plant that you operate isn't sort of, polluting rivers, for example. Operational and resource efficiency would sort of be taking that one step further and say, okay, how can we manufacture whatever it is using less energy or using less water, for example. Moving ahead, then you might be looking at sort of growth and innovation. How can I create new products and services? What about new materials? What about going into new markets, for example? It's using a sustainability lens and mindset to help drive business growth. And then, where I would say there aren't that many companies at that sort of purpose and value stage. I think ones that you probably are familiar with, Patagonia is often sort of touted there, where it's really everything the company does is using a sustainability lens. It's not an add-on, a bolt-on. It's not just philanthropy. It's not just planting trees, right? It's really at the core of what the business does. So in my sort of work, I would say most companies are somewhere in the middle. I think, maybe smaller companies maybe are hovering at kind of just the risk and compliance standpoint. But I think in the last 10 years or so, you really see many of them, in part driven by disclosure requirements or just sort of general peer, pressure. I think that you see that investors are asking for this more. As Natalie mentioned, there are stock market indice requirements as well. So a lot of different pressures driving it. But I think in a positive, most companies are at sort of in between stage 2 and 3, with a good handful moving towards that truly integrated model as well. So, as we've said, there are so many issues. How do companies prioritize? So the kind of classic framework that most companies are using is what's called a materiality assessment. I used to work in consulting. We worked with companies on doing materiality mapping. So materiality, and not to be confused if you're familiar with the sort of SEC financial definition of materiality. Materiality here is really, and there are a couple different frameworks. I'm not going to go into each of them, but I think it's helpful just to know them. It's in essence asking a company to put forth what are the most significant economic, environmental, and societal impacts that matter and drive your business value and that matter to your stakeholders as well. So GRI is one. They map a lot of different issues. They are sector agnostic. Contrast that with SASB at the bottom, which is the backing of Michael Bloomberg, for example, they have developed a set of issues by sector. We'll look at them in a moment. So in essence, if you're in the tech sector, you go on the SASB website, and you sort of download the standards that apply to your industry. Thanks, sorry about that. Thanks. And then the sort of, from SASB's perspective, they're really pushing for companies to report on the most material SASB indicators. They're looking for integration into a company's 10K. And then the integrated reporting work, I would say not that many companies are exploring this. I think it's sort of the most interesting and holds a lot of promise, because there you're really saying, talk about this in your financial reports. Don't make them two separate things. So if you really want to get investors to care about this, to really show that sort of these are issues that your company takes seriously, integrated reporting is another framework as well. All of this is voluntary. One of the challenges, right? The SEC is not saying you have to do all of these things. There are some climate disclosures the SEC is saying you have to do. I think that's also a positive trend as well. But right now, sustainability reporting, as we're discussing it, is all voluntary. But I would say most Fortune 500 companies are all issuing some type of statements and updates and progress on their sustainability work. Not going to go into these, but just to also say there are a lot of different risk assessment tools that get into really specific issue areas. So things around natural capital valuation, water risk, human rights, labor standards as well. So the ones prior are the more sort of general sustainability, but there's also very in-depth tools that companies are using as well. So a materiality assessment process, there's no one way to go about it, but in essence, I always think about it in terms of 4 steps. The first is coming up with your long list. What are the issues that you want to map, that you want to explore? You conduct interviews with internal stakeholders and external stakeholders. So when we would do this, we would call up environmental groups or regulators or customers, or so you really are going outside of the organization to get their sort of perspectives as well. Then you're mapping the different issues. I'll show you some examples. And then what you do is you use that to identify what are our most material issues, how do we prioritize them, which then informs your strategy development as well. So this is from SASB. They actually divide the tech sector into a bunch of different sub areas. I just pulled 2. So this one is for software, and so it's a little hard to read. It's not a great way to kind of display the information. But in essence, what you're looking at is this is what SASB has put forth as the most material issues. So reading down the left, you have environmental footprint of hardware and infrastructure. Probably not surprising. So for example, what you would be reporting on would be total energy consumed, total water withdrawn, etc. Then data privacy, freedom of expression. So here, I'm not going to read them all, but they're looking for accounting of description of policies and practices relating to behavioral advertising, user privacy as well. They're also looking at lists of countries where core products or services are subject to government required monitoring, blocking, censoring, etc. Continued, they would ask you to report on data security, and then recruiting and managing a global, diverse, and skilled workforce as well. So you see a cross-section of environmental, economic, and social. They also view intellectual property protection as a material issue, and then managing systemic risks from technology disruptions as well. So this is kind of one framework. This was consensus driven. There was a lot of work that went into developing these. But for the software and IT sector, according to SASB, these are sort of, if you're only choosing a few issues to report on, these should be them. And then internet, media, and services was the other sub group that I looked at. Again, we have environmental footprint issues. Not surprising, like data centers are a huge material challenge for most companies. Also data privacy, advertising, data security, employee recruitment and inclusion, and then intellectual property as well. So a lot of overlap between those. This is what, so GRI, again, sector agnostic. There's just a whole list of different GRI standards. I think there's like 180 or something. It can really get, there's a lot. But here, they talk about water, biodiversity, employment, public policy, customer health and safety, right? So if you're issuing a GRI report, you can pick and choose, but GRI really would say like biodiversity isn't that relevant to us, for example. But GRI really views that sort of every company should at least be thinking about these in some way. So the next last set of slides I just pulled from some tech company sites how they describe and talk about their material issues. You'll see there's no one way, right? Because it's not regulated, not required. There's no set format that companies talk about this. The most common one, which I'll show you, it's not the one I'm starting with, is kind of in a 2x2 or some sort of scatter plot. So Twitter, they talk about sort of, it's not, I couldn't find kind of a formal sustainability report, if you will, but they talk, I found this one sort of a mixture of both sort of causes and issues that they care about and are devoting maybe more philanthropic dollars to, versus ones that are sort of more of a classic kind of, this is a material sustainability challenge for us. So for example, media literacy, what they write about it is sort of, yes, sort of having more people be media literate is important to their business. It's an issue that they're tackling, it appears, through sort of philanthropy. Freedom of expression and civil liberties, right? That's obviously very core to how the platform operates, policies that they have as well. So I started with a sort of slightly different one. Microsoft's been reporting in a more traditional format for years. This is from their 2017 CSR report. Again, people call it CSR, they call it sustainability. Here, Microsoft lays out what they have arrived at as their most material, and again, a lot of these align to sort of what we were looking at before. Here we're moving into a more classic kind of presentation. Of course, people are doing interesting things with how they report this, but here is in essence kind of how a company, after they do that analysis that I mentioned, would then kind of map the issues. So what you're looking at is on the y-axis is basically how the issue impacts Xerox in this example. It's sort of what's the business impact, and then on the y, it's from low to high is what's the importance to stakeholders. So when you went out and interviewed your stakeholders, how did they rank the issue? So one thing to know is when we talk about these, every issue on here is something that the company needs to be doing something about. It's not just because it's down in the lower left that they can forget about it. But what it means is the ones that rise to the upper those are the ones that sort of, if you're going to spend your effort and you're going to sort of do the most innovative and progressive things, that's where your focus will be. So for example, down here, we view these as like table stakes, right? So security, it's not something you can do a lot of like exciting, sexy things with necessarily, but if Xerox doesn't have security practices in place, they're not in, business anymore, for example. But on, the sort of ones on the upper right, economic performance, end of life management, waste, energy efficiency, right? These are the ones that they sort of view as their most material and the areas that they can sort of have the most to sort of manage, if you will. So if they were going to write a strategy, they're probably going to focus on those. Then I pulled HP. For some reason, 2017 was the year. But again, another sort of similar presentation of issues. In their upper right, they have circular, the sort of circularity issues, energy and GHG emissions, IT for sustainable development. I think that's interesting, right, for HP. How can they use their products to maybe sort of impact some of the other sustainability global, challenges as well. Paper and printed material, privacy issues, energy efficiency of their products, and supply chain responsibility. So I don't think any of these are that surprising for them. But, what I meant to say just one quick thing going backwards a sec. Some people are often curious, like an issue that's up here, right? Stakeholders really care about it, but the company doesn't at all. So we often would view that as maybe like a fast-moving issue. So if this is also a process where companies might say like, wow, all of our stakeholders are talking about X, Y, Z. It's not even on our radar. So it may be something where you might want to then sort of explore, why are all of our stakeholders so interested in this, for example. So it's a good way both for you to obviously prioritize your issues, but also uncover new ones as well. And again, I'll just say it, every issue on here is something a company should be doing something about. It's just the degree to sort of how much time and energy they're spending on it. That's it for my portion. But now we're going to do, which is really exciting, is hear from Sunya, who works on these issues day to day at Salesforce, to talk about how Salesforce is bringing sustainability to life there. So,
thank you so much. I'm really excited to virtually join you all. As was introduced, I work at Salesforce. We're a Fortune 500 company, the world's leading CRM company, customer relationship management software. We're based here in San Francisco. About 40,000 employees around the world. Most of our customers are brands you know and love. B2B software enterprise. So really excited to join. I think the goal is to help bring to life all of the great background information that Natalie and Sophie shared. And I'm going to leave a ton of time for questions because I think that is the most fun for me and hopefully the most useful for everyone in the audience. And I can't see you, but hopefully through the questions I can kind of engage and connect with you in a more real way. Want to give kind of a quick background of sustainability at Salesforce. As a company, we just turned 20 years old last week, and sustainability at Salesforce has been a formal department since about 2005. Before my time, I've been at Salesforce for 5.5 years. But famously, the way that our department started, which I think is just a really inspiring and interesting story, and this could be you, is a woman named Sue, who was just a normal Salesforce employee with no particular background in sustainability, but an environmental passion, raised her hand in an all-hands meeting and asked our founder and CEO why we weren't doing more around climate change and climate action. And he apparently looked at her, paused a second, and said, "Great question, why don't you go figure out what we should be doing?" So careful what you wish for, and now, many years later, we have a very mature, established sustainability team that works on environmental issues as our day job. There are 10 of us full-time, and we have as well a very robust environmental green team, which I'll speak more to, as well as business partners all around the company that help really execute and champion our work. So I wanted to share with you all the materiality matrices that Sophie shared are such great examples of how we think about our material issues, and we went through that process. We don't share that publicly. Should go to the yeah, thank you. We don't share our matrix publicly. We just don't think there's a lot of value in that. But I wanted to give you a look behind the curtain at how we think about what we engage in, how we make decisions. And we're fortunate that we're a very values-aligned company. We take our values very seriously here. Our executives are very focused on that. And so whenever we have a kind of incoming question on whether we want to take on a new initiative or expand, we try to look to our core values, which are innovation, equality, customer success. And we look to see how the new initiative might impact that. And then similar to the importance of the business on the 4x4, or 2x2 rather, business impact is the next thing we look at. How can we use sustainability to fuel sustainable growth of our business, to better meet the needs of our stakeholders, to reduce risk, to reduce cost, to increase revenue, that sort of thing. But the third one is what we care about the most, really. We want to have our own house in order, but we think what's so exciting about being in the tech sector and being a large-scale company is the impact at scale we have, potentially. The potential we have to have impact at scale. So this idea of a ripple effect, how can we pilot things to pave the way for others? How can we find new models? How can we use our voice? So if you go to the next slide, this is a kind of overview of the types of programs that we have. Because we're in the tech company space, we're a cloud company, our most material issue from an environmental standpoint is energy and greenhouse gas emissions that are related from energy consumption, primarily in our data centers, as was mentioned. So we have very robust focused programs on energy and carbon. We've had a renewable energy target that's been public for many years, since 2013. And we just announced over the last year that we're going to get to our 100% goal by 2022, which is really exciting. We're about half the way there. And then in 2017, we announced that we had achieved net zero carbon emissions for our entire company globally. And we're operating a carbon neutral cloud. So what this means is we've done work internally to find as many efficiencies as we can, and then what we can't completely reduce or avoid, we look to mitigate through renewable energy purchases or high quality carbon credits. We also have a lot of employees who are working in offices around the world, so we look to design and operate really sustainable spaces that are not only great for the environment, but really great for the employees and the customers and everyone who uses them. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in a second. And then engagement is a core part of Salesforce culture, kind of famously known for something called the 1-1-1 model, which is integrated philanthropy model that we pioneered at our founding. So we have very, very engaged employees, and a lot of company resources are put towards engaging employees. So that's kind of the big picture overview, and now I'm going to deep dive into a couple of our program areas so that you can see what this actually looks like. Go to the next slide, please. One that's really exciting, and I think might resonate with you all being in New York and being around the finance industry, is a new impact fund that we spun up about a year and a half ago. Salesforce has a ventures fund that has been around for quite some time that invests in B2B software enterprise SaaS companies as a way to either kind of groom companies that we might want to acquire down the road, or technology that we'd like to see advance, or simply just to have a great return on investment. And a couple of years ago, we launched the Salesforce Impact Fund as a part of our ventures portfolio, which is $50 million that's put to work investing in entrepreneurs that are tackling some of the world's greatest challenges. And the 4 issue areas that we're focused on funding within are education and workforce development, sustainability, diversity and inclusion, and social sector technology. So very exciting. Encourage you to Google Salesforce Impact Fund and check out the website and see all the great portfolio companies. One we just most recently invested in is a company, Fuel, that is looking at reducing student debt, which has become a really crippling, horrible issue for many millennials and their parents. So I mentioned our offices and how we think about office sustainability and human health. We are so excited that we had a marquee project, the Salesforce Tower in San Francisco, where I'm sitting right now today, which is a building that we are about half the building in terms of occupancies. We partnered really closely with Lofton Properties, the owner, to do a lot of really innovative pilots. The EE Platinum buildings with the highest level of certification for both the core building and the interior space that Salesforce designs. And what we're really, really excited about is the building will soon have an operational black water system, which is recycling water that is used in the building and putting it back into the building for non-drinking water, non-potable uses such as toilet flushing, water tower cooling, irrigation, things like that. It's never before used in an office tower environment. It's been used in markets like Israel and Australia where there's a lot of water shortage and in some municipal buildings, but this is the first use case that we know of in a commercial high-rise. We're really excited about that. And then healthy materials is another area that we're investing in quite heavily. And it's the idea that everything that's in our built environment, where, oh, by the way, we spend so much of our time inside. Hopefully you spend less time inside than I do, but I know that many of us are inside, whether it's your office, your gym, your church, your home, for most of our lives. And so it's really important that all of the construction materials, the furniture, the furnishings, things like carpet, ceiling tiles, tables, all of that is contributing to your health versus detracting from it. So we're looking at indoor air quality, the full life cycle of certain materials, things like that, and trying to advocate with our buying power that the market create more sustainable, healthier products. Next. Employee engagement I mentioned. It is really fun when here at Salesforce. About 1 in 5 employees participate with us actively. We have over 40 teams around the world, and these are volunteer-led, so they work on whatever they're most passionate about in terms of environmental issues, and it's just incredibly inspiring to have these employees who have completely different day jobs join with us and help scale our work all around the world. Next. Something that's really interesting and unique to Salesforce, I think, is that in terms of marketing, we really use events as a company as a big way to connect with our customers and our larger community and stakeholders. I like to think of events as Salesforce's love language. And what that looks like for us is the world's largest technology conference that we host in September every year. And we have a 4-part pillar system where we look at what we source and try to make sure anything we're sourcing for the events that we host are responsible, but also whatever we use, we try to use as little as possible, and then on the back end, try to make sure that we're reducing waste to landfill. And then one of the most fun parts is actually how do we use the fact that we have over 170,000 registered attendees for Dreamforce, for example, to engage with folks around climate issues and raise awareness. And last year, we were really fortunate to have Al Gore join us as our first Climate Summit keynote speaker. So very exciting. Next slide, please. So where are we today? We actually were a big part of the Global Climate Action Summit here in San Francisco in the fall, September 2018. And we used that as a key moment to announce some additional public targets. And you can see them here. I won't go through all of them, but basically what we did is we took a number of really programs that were mature across the business and tried to challenge ourselves to take them 1 or 2 steps further. So additional rigorous certifications for our office buildings, expanding into addressing our transportation emissions, looking more into supply chain influence, looking into water, increasing the amount we invest in climate entrepreneurs, and then one of my favorite is trying to use our voice in a much more impactful way in terms of policy. So that was a deep dive into some of our programs. I hope we still have time for lots of questions, and definitely happy to dive into anything you're interested in a little bit more detail.
Awesome. Thank you so much, both. I think maybe just a quick round of applause for them. I have about 10 minutes.